Makes Me Wanna Holler by Nathan McCall. Chapter 11. B&E's. The ice cream truck ripoff was just part of an extended binge, a reflection of a shiftless mindset of stealing and hanging out that the fellas and I acquired as we grew older. Sometimes, we spent whole days standing on the side of the 7-Eleven, talking, gambling, and begging coins from customers to buy cheap wine. Rather than go home and eat lunch and dinner, we steal from the store, sending one dude inside to rip off bread, another to take bologna, and a third to pick up sodas. We even stole cookies and ice cream for dessert. 2 large steel drums, which were used as trash cans, sat in front of the store. One night, after the 7-Eleven had closed, we lifted the drums and flung them through the big plate glass window. The cans made perfect man-sized holes, enabling us to rush inside and loot beer, wine, and the cheap watches they kept behind the counter. We drank the brew and sold the other stuff, which brought in a decent take for a 5-minute job. My introduction to white music came about as a result of a ripoff. I was walking through the parking lot of a shopping mall one day and spotted a carrying case and a pair of tennis rackets in the car. Seeing that the car was unlocked, I reached inside and took the shit, hoping to unload it on somebody and get some cash. But when I got home and opened the carrying case, I realized that it was filled with 8-track tapes by white musicians I knew nothing about. At first, it seemed like a wasted hit. I thought, ain't nobody gonna wanna buy no damn white music. Then I got high on some reefer one night and just for the hell of it, flipped some of the white 8-tracks into the tape player. I listened and discovered a whole new world of music I'd never known about. They turned out to be some of the hottest tapes by white musicians of the times. Deep Purple, Spooky Tooth, Foghat, Jethro Tull, Cat Stevens, Chicago. The one tape I tripped hardest on was Pink Floyd's classic Dark Side of the Moon. Listening to those tapes, I grew to love that music and for the first time in my life, learned a lot about what was on white folks' mind. The main reason we hustled and stole so hard was to pick up money to buy clothes. Among the cats who hung in the streets, Cavalier Manor had a tradition of slick dressers. Carbo Earl, Count, Kenny Banks, and others. When I was much younger, I'd always watch a particular smooth-dressing guy who often went to the bus stop near my house. I never learned his name, but every time I saw him, he was dressed seriously sharp from head to toe, in a perfectly matching outfit. If he wore green pants, he coordinated them with a green shirt, green shoes, and a green fedora with a green feather. He'd do the same with black, red, purple, and other colors. If I saw a guy dressed like that today, he looked like a clown to me. But back then, I thought that dude was the essence of cool. I wondered if he didn't own a ride because he spent so much money on his clothes. And I actually debated in my head whether it was more important to have a car to get around town than to look sharp on the bus. I concluded it was more important to look sharp because I felt better about myself when I was clean. It was important to Shell Shock to be able to dress well too. Without clothes, he would have gotten no play from the ladies. He had an awkward build, thick lips, a large head, and a super stringy afro that looked weird running up from his high hairline. Shell Shock was also short on change in the personality department. He cussed girls out all the time. Personality or not, babes flocked to the guys who ragged hard. There was a big difference in how girls responded to Shell Shock and me when we were clean and when we weren't. Often on Friday mornings, we'd catch the city bus to another high school in Portsmouth to rap to new girls. When we were dressed in blue jeans or khakis, babes wouldn't give us the time of day. But when we were clean, we got all the phone numbers we wanted. The different responses convinced us that we had to hustle because we had to have lots of nice rags to run our games. My mother suspected I was doing things I shouldn't be doing. She see me leaving the house, dressed sharp as a tack in clothes she knew she hadn't bought. One day, as I was preparing to go out, she asked, "Boy, where you getting all those clothes?" I played it off. "I borrowed them from friends, Mama." She had no choice but to leave it alone. Sometimes, though, she looked me in the eye and warned, "Boy, you better be careful. You're going to learn one day that life out there ain't as easy as you think it is." I look at her as if to say, "Get the fuck out of my face, woman." Years later, though, I saw exactly what Mama meant. Every now and then, Mama would give me money to buy a knit shirt or to get a pair of pants out of layaway, even though she didn't have that kind of money to blow. I knew that was her subtle way of trying to discourage me from stealing. Mama and my stepfather also urged me to try to work part-time gigs in high school to earn money to buy what I wanted. During one year, I got a part-time job through the school work-study program. I went to work cleaning boats for a dealer on Airline Boulevard. After taxes, the minimum wage pay I earned barely covered my bus fare. I stayed on that job for all of a month. Then, without giving the boss advance notice, I disappeared. In light of all that was happening in the streets, school often seemed like a hell of a waste of time. I often wonder why I even bothered going when I could be somewhere working on ways to boost the cash flow. I routinely skipped classes, and often on Fridays, we threw hooky parties at Bimbo's crib while his parents were at work. We gambled at those parties, danced, and jammed girls like it was going out of style. Mainly, I went to school to hang out, profile, and rap to babes. Most of the fellas were even more nonchalant than me about school. I found out just how little school meant to them when we reached the midway point of our 10th grade year. The morning late bell had sounded, and Bimbo, Lep, Frog, and I were walking down the empty hallway trying to figure out a way to get admitted to our classes. Lep grew impatient. "Fuck this shit, man. I ain't going through all these changes just to get in class. I'm tired of this hassle anyway. Let's quit school." In a half dare, he tossed his books, papers, and notepads into a metal trash can near the water fountain. Bimbo and Frog followed suit. Then they looked at me. I searched my mind to come up with reasons to stay in school. "Y'all niggas crazy, man. What you want to quit for with all these fine babes in here?" I thought of my stepfather and added, "I can't quit school without a job." They said, "We can go on the war, man. We can go in the Marines on the buddy-buddy plan and get stationed together. Maybe in California." I got indignant. "Fuck the buddy-buddy plan. I'm going to class. I'll catch y'all later." I turned to walk toward my classroom. Before going in, I turned around and looked just in time to see the fellas bopping around the corner, heading out the building. They left and never came back. They dropped out of school just like that. I understood why it was so easy for them to quit. There was little in the classes we took that seemed even remotely relevant to our world. I couldn't figure out how learning all that stuff would translate to helping us form a better life. It seemed that everybody wanted to make money and escape Portsmouth, and most saw the military as their only sure way out. Frog went into the Job Corps, but Lep joined the Marines, and Bimbo, Greg, Nutbrain, and several others joined the Army. Two of my older brothers, Junie and Dwight, went into the Army to get away. Billy left college after 1 year, but he just went to New York to live. I wanted out too, but I couldn't see myself taking orders and going to war. There was no future in it. When I thought about my life, it seemed there was no future in anything. The only one among us who appeared to have a hint of a future was Shell Shock's older brother, Ton, who was a year ahead of us at Woodrow Wilson High. A thuggish star halfback who broke the state scoring record, Ton seemed destined to play football at a major university and go to the pros. Because his athletic skills helped Wilson continue his winning tradition, He even had the support of white teachers and administrators who otherwise kept their distance from blacks at school. Beyond their enthusiastic backing of star athletes, many white teachers at Wilson seemed unconcerned whether black students passed or failed. They weren't committed to preparing us for life in the real world like my black junior high school teachers were. One white lady who taught English literature took a passing interest in me. I enjoyed the short stories we talked about in that teacher's class. I liked her class enough to go fairly regularly, make good grades, and read the stories she assigned us. I'd leave the block early some nights just to read those stories. I'd be out there joning and drinking wine until about 10 p.m. Then I'd go home, put on a pot of coffee, pop a slice of bread into the toaster, and when no one was around, read that stuff and enjoy myself. I think the teacher liked me too. She pulled me aside one day after class and said, "You know, you really are a bright student, and I think you can make something of yourself if you took that dangling earring out your ear, buckled your belt, and applied yourself more." She might as well have been speaking French. I couldn't relate to what she was talking about. We couldn't connect. There was no common language. I wonder how I could make something of myself in the fucking white man's world. But I knew she meant well. And I suppose the occasional encouragement from her and a few others was enough to keep me minimally motivated to stick around. Teachers like those made me wonder sometimes what I could do if I seriously hit the books. Every now and then, I'd look at the lames carrying armloads of books and think back to when I was one of them. I wondered what kept them interested in all that stuff. Once, I passed through a school science fair in the cafeteria and stopped to look at the miniature volcanoes and other creations in the competition. I remember thinking, there was a time when I would have had a project on display. That time was long gone, and the experience of being engaged in school seemed distant to me. With much of the gang gone, I spent many evenings after school hanging with shell shock and looking for hustles. The types of hustles guys got into were often determined by the location of their neighborhood. When we first moved into Cavalier Manor, Greg, who used to hang with my brother Dwight and me, lived across the street. By the time we were teenagers, Greg's mother had gotten a divorce and moved with him across town to a public housing project named Washington Park. Since they lived near the naval shipyard, Greg and his downtown friends spent a good bit of time rolling sailors who often staggered past Greg's neighborhood on their way back to the shipyard after a night on the town. Greg and his friends' location downtown also put them close to shoppers patronizing stores along the main commercial strip of Effingham and High Streets. They often went out at night to snatch pocketbooks. I went cruising with them a few times, but I couldn't get into that. They often preyed on old ladies who reminded me of my hard-working grandmother, Bampoose. Every time I thought about it, I consider how'd I feel if somebody snatched Bampoose's purse. Sometimes, I picked up hustling ideas at the 7-Eleven, which is like a criminal union hall. Crap shooters, shoplifters, stick-up men, burglars, everybody stopped off at the store from time to time. While hanging up there one day, I ran into Holt, who lived around my way and often swung with the fellas and me. He had a pocket full of cash, even though he had quit school and was unemployed. I asked him, "Yo man, what you been into?" "Me and my partner kick in cribs and make a killing. You ought to come go with us sometimes." Holt had been hanging with a guy called Holler, who did B&Es, breaking and enterings. They did break-ins in Cavalier Manor during the daytime when people were away at work. I hooked school one day, went with them, and pulled my first B&E. Before we went to the house, Hillard, a tall, lanky, self-assured guy who kept a .38 pistol tucked into his belt, explained his system. "Look, man, we're going to split up and go to each house on the street. Knock on the door. If somebody answers, make up a name and act like you're at the wrong crib. If nobody answers, We mark it for the hit. I asked, how are we going to get in? Don't worry about that. It turned out that he had perfected a special way to kick doors off hinges. We found the house in no time. Holler motioned for Holt and me to stand back, then reared back and shot his big foot against the door hinges, knocking the wood door ajar. Boom! He stood back a moment, admiring his work. Then we rushed into the house and started plundering. Hilliard said he needed to be in and out of there in 10 minutes in case someone called the cops. He directed each of us to search a separate room and look for small, lightweight items that were easy to sell. Television sets, stereos, jewelry, and guns. It felt weird entering a stranger's home. As I rifled through those people's most private possessions, I felt a peculiar power over them, even though we'd never met. We got our haul and headed for the door when Holt said, hold up, man, I gotta take a leak." He pulled out his meat and sprayed the living room walls and furniture. After that, he always left some similar destructive signature when he kicked in the crib. I never understood why he did that. I guess it was his way of showing his contempt for the world. We sold our merchandise to Hilliard's fence and split the loot. After I learned the ropes, Shell Shock and I branched out, doing B&Es on our own. We learned to get in and out of houses in no time flat. We unloaded much of the merchandise on a prominent Portsmouth dentist who paid us in cash. During one visit, he promised to put a real gold tooth in my mouth if I brought him a portable TV on our next haul. We also sold hot items to a group of transvestites who operated a lavishly furnished prostitution house near the naval shipyard. Even when armed, I always grew slightly nervous when we entered that house. I thought the transvestites, who wore garish makeup and flirtatiously battered their eyes, might try to lure us into their bedrooms, but they were all business. They paid good money for our merchandise and once even let us hang around and watch while they entertained a bunch of drunken sailors. Holt and Hilliard continued to team up until they got busted and tagged with a string of burglaries. They both were sent to prison. That made Holt the first dude in our gang to serve serious time. While he was away, I often wondered what life was like for him there, and sometimes I wonder if I might one day take his place. I didn't fear going to prison as much as I feared getting caught by surprise in somebody's house. Years before I started doing B&Es, a guy in Cavalier Manor named Charles Lee was shot to death by a woman who caught him burglarizing her home. I never forgot that incident, and I thought about it every time I went into a dark house. I gave up B&Es after a serious scare in the house shook me up. As usual, Shell Shock and I knocked at the door, then went to the side of the house and broke out a bedroom window with the butt of a sawed-off shotgun. We couldn't figure out how to kick the hinges off of doors like Hilliard. Since I was the smaller of us two, Shell Shock lifted me up through the window and handed me the shotgun. Once I was in, I was supposed to go to the front door and open it for him. But when I turned around, I thought I saw something move in the far corner of that darkened room. I froze, fearful. Every nerve stood on end. Thoughts of Charles Lee raced through my mind as I aimed the gun barrel at the corner and eased my forefinger around the trigger. I squinted to adjust my eyes to the dark while trying to balance conflicting voices shouting in my panicked head. "Shoot! It's somebody laying for you. Shoot now! No, don't shoot. It's a baby. It looks like a baby in the crib." I stood there terrified and indecisive for what seemed like forever, waiting for a telling sign from the corner. But nothing happened. It was a standoff between the darkness and me. I probably would have stood there frozen half the night had Shell Shock not knocked hard at the front door. I waited to see if the figure would respond to the knocking sound, but it didn't. Keeping my eyes glued to that corner, I eased my way out the room and let Shell Shock inside. He said, "Damn, man, I thought you had forgot about me out here." My heart was still pounding. "Nah, man, I thought somebody was in that bedroom." With guns ready, we walked back to the room and turned on the lights. There, in the corner, The one I had feared contained a sniper waiting to ice me was a pile of rumpled clothes. We gathered as many valuables as we could carry, then split. I've never broken into another house after that. I started going with Shell Shock after school to look for other, more lucrative hustles. Several times we went to Virginia Beach oceanfront to rip off adventure-hungry white boys hanging on the tourist strip. We'd offer to sell them drugs, then take their money and dash. But Virginia Beach was too far from home, and the police presence there was too strong to make a regular go on the strip. Shell Shock came up with the idea of traveling to Norfolk in search of potential victims, who we called Vicks. That's when we started sticking up. We were both 17 then, and our first hit came late one night on the main drag of a public housing project named Tidewater Park. We dated girls there once and knew our way around the hood. It was conveniently located near the tunnel leading to Portsmouth. We knew we could make our strike and shoot back through the tunnel and into our hometown. Some guys were walking down the street one night, and we stepped out from the shadows of a tree and confronted them. "Yo man, you got a cigarette?" Before they could respond, Shell Shock drew a shotgun, held it aloft and said calmly, "Give it up." They fumbled through their pockets and handed over their wallets. We made them run in one direction and we dashed in another. That first hit tripped me out on a lot of levels. First, it was so easy. 2 or 3 minutes and we were done. Also, the hit marked a kind of crossover for both Shell Shock and me. All the shit we done up to then, even the B&Es, seemed more like mischief than anything else. But when we stuck those guys up, we crossed over deep into felony country. It was serious shit and I knew it. At the same time, I didn't think about the consequences of getting busted. Nobody thinks about consequences because nobody plans to get caught in the first place. So we crossed over, and we did all right. Several nights a week after Shell Shock's mother went to sleep, we took her car and went to Norfolk. We did most of our stick-ups in and around Church Street, then considered one of the roughest areas in Tidewater. Church Street, which was lined with bars, restaurants, pawn shops, and clothing stores that catered to blacks, bustled round the clock with prostitutes, drug dealers, hustlers, and various thrill seekers. It was easy to catch Vicks, especially tipsy sailors walking through alleys and back streets at night. The police presence was so weak that we could usually make several hits in the same community before making our dash for the Portsmouth tunnel. Sticking up gave me a rush that I never got from B&Es. There was an almost magical transformation in my relationship with the rest of the world when I drew that gun on folks. I always marveled at how the toughest cats on those street corners whimpered and begged for their lives when I stuck that barrel of a sawed-off shotgun into their faces. Adults, who ordinarily would have commanded my respect, were forced to follow my orders like obedient kids. After several clean hits, it became clear to me that I had found my hustle. I was making good money and didn't have to take hustles from Whitey while doing it. The only downside to sticking up in black neighborhoods was that the people were so poor, we had to rob several of them to get $100. Shell Shock came up with an idea to remedy that. Let's take the niggas' clothes too. One night soon after, we stuck up a corner that was a favorite gambling spot for Tidewater Park hoods. As they stood under a streetlight rolling dice, we walked up, flashed our guns, and cleaned them out. We took their money, their coats, and their shoes, then fired shots in the air and made them dash barefoot down the street. We sold the clothes we didn't want and kept those stylish pieces that fit. After that, we usually drove home after work with a back seat filled with expensive shoes and the finest leather coats around. We pimped into school the next day clean as hell, profiling the clothes we stolen off somebody's back the night before. Our sharp clothes and hip style boosted our popularity in school. I saw girls and dudes, especially young underclassmen, gazing admiringly at Shell Shock and me the same way I had admired Scooby D, Kenny Banks, and other old heads not very many years before.